All right, so are we ready to dive into blockchain? Let's figure out if this is truly revolutionary or just all hype.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. So we've got articles galore, even a deep dive on Wikipedia to unpack all this blockchain stuff. So let's get to it.
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting about blockchain is this idea, it's a digital record of transactions, but it has these really cool twists.
Okay, so we're talking like a chain of blocks, right?
Yeah.
And each one is linked to the one before it.
Exactly, yeah. And that's where this whole trust thing comes in, right? If you mess with one block, the whole chain falls apart.
So it's like really, really secure.
Insanely secure, yeah.
Okay, so no single point of failure. And I mean, that's got to have huge implications for data and security in general, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's this decentralized nature that really sets it apart from, your typical databases that are usually controlled by just one entity.
And Wikipedia really hammered this home, right? With blockchain, we're talking about a whole network of computers all holding a copy of the ledger. That's pretty wild.
It's like a digital fortress.
Yeah, exactly.
And that leads right into this whole transparency thing. Every single transaction is recorded and everyone can see it.
Oh, wow.
Although the people involved can stay anonymous.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. But isn't there like a risk there? I mean, couldn't people use that anonymity for illegal stuff?
Oh, for sure, yeah. That's actually a big debate surrounding all this. It's a tough issue. No easy answers.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So we've got this digital fortress. It's totally transparent, but also anonymous. But how does this thing actually work?
Let's break it down a little. We got to start with hashing. So basically, each block has a unique code that's created from the data in the previous block. And this code, it acts like a fingerprint for that block. Any little change would completely change the code, so you'd know right away if something was messed with.
So each block is like carrying a snapshot of everything that came before it.
Exactly. And it's this chain of these hash codes that makes the blockchain like tamper-proof. But to add a new block, the whole network needs to agree on which one goes next, and that's where consensus mechanisms come into play.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and this is where it gets a little more complex.
I've heard of proof of work, and that sounds like a lot.
It can be. Think of it like computers battling it out to solve these crazy hard puzzles.
Okay.
The winner gets to add the next block to the chain, and they get rewarded for it. It's called mining, and it's pretty energy intensive, not gonna lie.
Yeah, that's definitely a downside I've heard about.
But Wikipedia also mentioned this other thing called proof of stake, which seems like a lot more sustainable.
Oh, really? What is that?
So basically, instead of solving puzzles, computers use their cryptocurrency holdings as a kind of vote. The more they hold, the better their chance of adding a block.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like their voting power is tied to their investment.
Right. And it encourages good behavior and addresses those energy concerns we talked about.
I like that.
So yeah, the big takeaway here is that whatever consensus mechanism they use, it's all about keeping the blockchain secure.
Okay, makes sense. But everyone's always talking about Bitcoin. Doesn't blockchain have way more potential than just cryptocurrency?
Absolutely. Let's dive into some of those possibilities. Imagine like a world where audit logs can't be messed with.
Okay, I'm listening.
It would ensure, like sensitive data in healthcare or finance is totally secure. Even think about voting systems.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's huge. No more data breaches or election scandals or anything like that.
It's a really powerful idea, and it's already being explored.
Very cool. So what else?
Supply chain management is another big one.
Like being able to trace a product's whole journey from the start to the finish.
Exactly. Every single step could be verified on blockchain. Total transparency and accountability in the supply chain. Imagine knowing that, like, organic label is actually legit.
Oh, that would be amazing.
I know, right? And this is really just scratching the surface.
It sounds like it, yeah. There's got to be tons more.
Oh, there is. Secure digital identities, decentralized marketplaces, you name it. We're just getting started with what blockchain can do.
Wow. Okay, I'm getting pretty excited about all this. Right. But we got to be real, right? No technology is perfect. What are like some of the downsides, the criticisms?
Right. Well, one big one is that it can be kind of inefficient. Adding new blocks, especially with that proof of work system we talked about, it can be slow and use a ton of energy.
And the bigger it gets, the harder it is to manage, right?
Exactly, yeah. Scalability is a real issue. And then there's the hype factor.
Yeah.
Some people think it's being, like, oversold, like it's a solution looking for a problem.
Ah, so it's not a magic bullet for everything.
Right. It's important to be realistic. It's got huge potential, but it also has limitations.
So how do we cut through the hype? How do we know what it's really capable of?
Well, that's where, critical thinking comes in. We got to look at each specific use case and weigh the good and the bad. It's not about blindly jumping on the bandwagon. It's about understanding what it's good at and what it's not so good at.
Okay, so it's more about how we use it rather than the technology itself.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. It's a tool, a really powerful tool, but how we use it, that's what really matters. And, there's this philosopher, Maurizio Ferraris. He made this interesting comparison. He said blockchain is basically a high-tech version of a tally stick.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, he was saying that at its core, blockchain is all about keeping a record of transactions that can't be messed with.
Like those sticks they used to use with notches carved in them.
Exactly, yeah. The technology may be super complex, but the idea is pretty simple.
That's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. So is blockchain really a revolution or just a digital version of something we've been doing forever?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And it's one we're going to keep exploring. We've covered a lot, but there's still so much more to learn. Let's take a deeper dive into some specific uses of blockchain next. What do you say we start with auditing and supply chain stuff?
All right, so let's get down to brass tacks here. You mentioned auditing earlier. How is blockchain changing things up in that world?
Okay, well, imagine like every single piece of data, every transaction, all documented and like unchangeable. That's what blockchain brings to auditing.
So no more like shady stuff, no more losing records or anything.
Nope. We're talking total transparency. Like you can't hide anything.
That sounds pretty intense.
Think about like financial audits, right? Every transaction would be right there on the blockchain, from like huge deals to, small stuff.
Oh, wow. So companies wouldn't be able to get away with anything.
Yeah, it would be way harder to like cook the books. But it's not just about catching the bad guys. This could change how we track, like charitable donations, make sure the money is really going where it's supposed to.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
And it's not just about money either. Think about healthcare, like patient records on a blockchain. Only authorized people could access them.
That would be amazing.
No more data breaches, no more lost records. It would be huge.
Yeah, that would be a huge relief. What about voting? Could blockchain make elections more secure?
That's a big one right now. Blockchain voting systems could make it like impossible to tamper with votes. Plus, it would be totally transparent. Anyone could audit the whole process.
Interesting. It sounds like blockchain could really bring a lot more trust to a lot of different areas.
For sure. And we haven't even talked about supply chain management yet.
Oh yeah, that was the other big one you mentioned. I'm really curious about that.
Okay, let's talk about something called conflict minerals. So these are raw materials that are mined in like war zones.
Right, and those materials end up in our electronics and stuff, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's a huge ethical issue.
I can imagine.
It's really hard to track where these minerals come from, so it's hard to know if they're like funding armed groups. But imagine if every step of the supply chain was recorded on a blockchain.
So you could actually see where each mineral came from.
You got it. Consumers could make informed decisions, and companies would be held accountable for their, sourcing practices.
That would be huge for ethical businesses.
Right, it's a win-win. And this isn't just for conflict minerals, it could be used for anything. Coffee, diamonds, you name it.
So like fair trade coffee, conflict-free diamonds.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. And it goes beyond just the ethical sourcing. We're talking food safety, tracking pharmaceuticals, even fighting counterfeiting.
Okay, my head is spinning with all the possibilities.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a second. We talked about limitations before. What are some of the challenges with blockchain?
Well, like we said, it can be hard to scale. As the blockchain grows, it gets harder to manage all that data. And the energy use, especially with proof of work, is still a problem.
Even with proof of stake becoming more popular.
Yeah, especially for the big ones like Bitcoin. And then there's the whole regulatory side of things. Governments are still trying to figure out how to regulate blockchain.
So it's kind of like the Wild West right now, with all these new ideas popping up.
Yeah, kind of. But that's what makes it so exciting. We're seeing this potentially world-changing technology being born.
It's pretty cool to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And speaking of changing the world, let's talk about some of the futuristic uses of blockchain.
Okay, hit me.
Have you ever heard of DAOs?
DAOs, what's that?
Decentralized autonomous organizations.
Ooh, that sounds fancy.
It's basically like a company or an organization that runs entirely on code. No need for managers or anything.
So like a company without a CEO. How does that even work?
All the rules and decisions, they're all programmed into a smart contract on a blockchain. These smart contracts can automate everything, manage resources, distribute profits, all without human involvement.
Whoa, okay. That's pretty radical.
It is. And the applications are endless. Investment funds, crowdfunding platforms, even whole cities could be run by DAOs.
A city run by code. That's wild.
I know, right? It's still early days, though. There's a lot to figure out, especially like the legal and regulatory stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So it's more of a glimpse into the future than something we'll see right away. But it shows you how powerful blockchain can be.
Totally. So we've talked about all these big picture things, but what about the average person? How can blockchain impact individuals?
That's a really important question. A lot of the focus is on these big, huge applications, but blockchain can empower individuals too. One big area is this idea of self-sovereign identity.
What's that?
Imagine you have total control over your digital identity. It's all stored securely on a blockchain.
So you wouldn't need the government or a company to verify who you are.
Exactly. You own your data, you decide who can see it and what they can use it for.
Wow, that's really empowering.
It is. And think about all the data we share online every day. Our browsing history, our shopping habits, our social media. Companies are collecting all of that and they're making money from it.
It is kind of creepy when you think about it, like someone's always watching.
With blockchain, you could actually get paid for sharing your data. You cut out the middleman and take control of your digital footprint.
So instead of being exploited, we could actually benefit from our own data.
Yeah, and it's not just about data. You can manage all your digital stuff on a blockchain. Cryptocurrencies, intellectual property, everything.
That would be amazing. It sounds like blockchain could really shift the balance of power.
It definitely has that potential. But like we talked about before, with any new technology, there are risks.
Right, got to keep that in mind.
You got to think about the downsides, the unintended consequences.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I think so. It's a powerful tool, but it can be used for good or bad. It all depends on us.
Okay, so how do we make sense of all this? The hype, the potential, the risks. It's a lot to take in.
That's a great question, and one we're going to dig into in the last part of our deep dive. We'll talk about the big picture stuff, the philosophy behind blockchain, the ethical questions, and what it all means for society as a whole.
All right, so we covered a ton of ground here, the ins and outs of blockchain, what it can do, even some pretty futuristic stuff.
Yeah.
But what does it all really mean? What's the big takeaway for all of us?
That is the question, isn't it? I mean, we've talked about transparency, making things more accountable, even empowering people. But there's this whole philosophical side to blockchain that I think is worth exploring.
Okay, yeah, I'm curious. What's the philosophy behind all this?
Well, blockchain kind of challenges how we think about trust. Traditionally, we've always relied on these big institutions like governments, banks, corporations to be the middleman. They're the ones we trust.
Yeah, they get the records, they make sure everything's fair.
Exactly. But blockchain offers a different way. It lets us create trust through this network without needing those big guys in the middle.
So instead of trusting a specific person or organization, you're trusting the system itself.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that has some pretty big implications, right? It could change how we organize, how we do business, even just how we interact with each other.
It sounds like it could be a total game changer, like a whole new way of thinking about things.
For sure. But it also brings up some ethical questions. For example, if we're moving to a decentralized world, how do we hold people accountable? Who's responsible when things go wrong?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to get excited about new tech, but we got to think about the potential downsides too.
Absolutely. There are always risks, things we didn't expect. Like with anonymity, it can protect privacy, but it can also be used for illegal activities.
Right. There are always two sides to the coin. It's like a powerful tool that can be used for good or bad.
Exactly. Which brings us back to something we talked about before, critical thinking. We got to look at each use of blockchain and really weigh the pros and cons. And we need to have these open discussions about the ethics of it all.
Yeah, it's not about just accepting it or rejecting it. It's about understanding all the complexities and making informed decisions.
Right. And in the end, the impact of blockchain depends on the choices we make, what rules we put in place, what values we prioritize.
So we're kind of at this crossroads right now, a big turning point for technology.
I think so, yeah. The decisions we make now will have a huge impact on the future.
Wow, okay. So listeners, it looks like we've reached the end of our blockchain deep dive. We've learned a lot, from the nitty-gritty technical stuff to the bigger picture questions.
It's been a great journey, and I hope it sparks your curiosity and giving you a better grasp on this amazing technology.
I know my brain is definitely full, but if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's a good thing. It means you're thinking about all this stuff, you're asking questions, and you're ready to keep exploring.
Exactly. This is just the beginning. There's so much info out there, from easy explanations to super technical deep dives.
So don't be afraid to keep learning, keep challenging what you think you know, and form your own opinions. Technology like this is always changing, so staying curious is key.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Keep that curiosity alive, folks.
Well said. Until next time, keep diving.